Welcome to Fuzzy's Opinion. On this channel, we will be discussing matters pertinent to Jamaicans at home and abroad. Today, I want to speak on the issue of crime, which, as we know over the years, has become an overwhelming and intractable problem for the Jamaican society. For a lot of people living today, younger people, this is kind of normal. But believe it or not, this was not always the case. There was a time when Jamaica was in probably the top 5 countries with the lowest murder rates. Now we're going to look at some historical data concerning murders over the years in Jamaica. We're going from 1970 to about 2016. And we're going to show you how things change over the years in regards to the number of murders committed on a yearly basis. We see right here, 1970, only 152 murders in Jamaica in 1970. 152 murders. Throughout the 70s, it remained pretty low, never going above 500 throughout the 70s. 1980, you see a spike right here. That was because of the 1980 election, that well-known election where there was a sudden spike in killing, most of which were politically motivated. So we had 899 murders that year, 1980. After the election in 81, it went back down. A little bit higher than the 70s, but it went back down. It's below 500, 400 something. Throughout the 80s, it remained below 500. Higher than the 70s, as I said, but still not as high as 1980. Now, the 90s, now you start to see a little spike. Start to reach a 500 mark in the 90s. 543, 1990. And the upward trend continue for the 90s. With a slight little dip here and there, but nothing significant. Until we reach the 2000s. That's where murders hit 1,000 for the first time in Jamaican history. In 2000. And it remained high throughout the 2000s, astronomically high. Astronomically high. Slight dip here and there, but still very high. 2016, they closed with 1,350 murders. So can you imagine, you're coming from 172 murders in 1970 to 1,350 murders. Been a steady rise over those decades. Steady rise. No significant decline. Steady rise. Now, with more people, you're gonna have more murders. But between 1970 and 2016, there was a 52% increase in population. However, there was a 788% increase in murders. So check this, a 52% rise in population and a 788% increase in murders. That's really striking. Now, these stats will lead to the obvious and logical question. What went wrong? The answer has to do with a confluence of factors such as political shenanigans, increased poverty, weak and corrupt justice system, and rapid urbanization, which led to a breakdown of traditional values and norms that once influenced social behavior and family dynamics. Now, to highlight how the society has changed over the years, I'm going to divide the society into three stages: pre-1960s, the promising 60s, and the post-1960s. Before the 1960s, majority of the Jamaican underclass resided in the countryside, where they led simple traditional lifestyle centered around farming, church, and family. All this began to unravel during the late 50s and early 60s when Jamaica started to become more industrialized. And most of this industrialization was, of course, in Kingston. So now this led to many people leaving the countryside, flocking to Kingston, looking for new economic opportunities. Unfortunately, there weren't enough jobs and housing for everyone. Now, this was a reality that led to a rise in what you call informal settlements, what people nowadays call capture land and all these things. So we have a rise in informal settlement, which, these informal settlements quickly turn into urban slums. And by the mid-70s, these slums, now with a new generation of delinquent and disaffected youths, had been transformed into full-blown bastions of crime and social dysfunction. The 70s also featured a sharp increase in political turmoil and politicians willing to exploit the poor and disaffected for political advantage. This exploitation came in the form of politicians issuing guns and imposing tribalism on the poor and disaffected. The clash of political ideologies and the attendant political violence of the 70s and early 80s had a devastating effect on the social and economic well-being of the society. Families were torn apart, sometimes with both parents fleeing to two separate locations and kids living in a third with uncles, aunts, grandparents. And obviously this lead to a lot of abuse and traumatic childhood experiences. Many businesses were also closed because it became increasingly dangerous to operate in such hostile environment. When the smoke cleared in the mid-80s, that's after the election, 1980 election, a broken Jamaica emerged with eroded traditional values, a gutted business class, and a surplus of armed, angry, and unemployed young men. These were the young men who were used as enforcers during the political upheaval. Many young people at that time saw only two options: migration or crime. Those who chose the latter began to organize themselves into gangs. And as Jamaica became more technologically advanced, these gangs also became more advanced and more knowledgeable of sophisticated criminal activities. Today, these gangs have evolved into what I call informal mini governments in their communities, where they rule with an iron hand. These gangs have now established national, regional, and international networks that facilitate drug smuggling, arms smuggling, human trafficking, extortion, and money laundering. It goes without saying that this increase in criminality in Jamaica has become a serious albatross to economic development. And a clear example of how crime is hindering economic development is the fact that many in the Jamaican diaspora are afraid to return home. I mention diaspora because they would bring investment, not only investment in the form of money, but also a wealth of knowledge and experience in relevant areas. Over the years, law enforcement has taken many approaches to combat crime, but none of these approaches has been proven to be particularly effective in bringing about a significant reduction in crime. Personally, I attribute this failure to the authorities' lack of a holistic approach to crime reduction. Well, of course, the law enforcement and legislative approach will certainly hamper criminals in the short term. However, if there's no focus on socio-cultural elements that creating and validating and sustaining the mindset which facilitate criminal ideations, not much progress will be made when it comes to significantly reducing crime. So what is a more holistic approach, in my opinion? That would include reconceptualizing how kids are taught, how kids are being educated, and the role of correctional facilities. You just send a person to GP and that's it. What's the end game? What's the purpose of prison? Is it for punishment or rehabilitation? They should also counteract, disincentivize, and penalize those who spread negative and socially destructive message through music and other cultural outlet, in addition to providing more opportunities and safety nets for women. Many families in Jamaica are headed by women, and at the end of the day, it's the woman who is raising the future criminal. So if you empower the woman, maybe you could eliminate a lot of future criminality. I also believe that there should be more focus in terms of identifying the youngsters who demonstrate a proclivity for violence at a young age. You could identify those persons and intervene at an early age to steer them away from, growing up to becoming a danger to society. I believe that could help. Also, I believe there should be more efforts being made to develop community centers where you can use art, music, theater, sports to foster psychosocial development among at-risk kids in volatile communities. Basically, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that crime is a multifaceted, complex system. And you cannot approach crime fighting from a one-dimensional perspective. You have to have a law enforcement, an economic, and a psychological perspective when it comes to fighting crime. That's my opinion. That's Fuzzy's opinion. Like, share, and subscribe.